So imagine you have two friends who are obsessed with crime, murder, mayhem, and unsolved mysteries. They have a passion for breaking down cases that have been cold for years. Well, welcome to Generation Y, a podcast where hosts Aaron and Justin give startling theories, dive into forensic evidence, and share their bold opinions. They dig deep looking for answers on cases of missing spouses, mysterious murders, serial killers, and more. One of the newest episodes tells the story of Jodie, who was murdered on her way to meet her boyfriend, Luke. Because Luke discovered her body, he was a person of interest. Throughout the trial, he insisted that he was innocent, yet was still sentenced to a minimum of 20 years. Was he telling the truth, or is he actually the murderer? In another chilling episode, Peter Bergner's truck crashed off a cliff near Reno. His wife, Renette, died, but Peter survived. Was it an accident, or did he intentionally crash? Generation Y reviews every detail of these cases to uncover the truth. And what I really love about Generation Y is just how relaxed and cozy the vibe the hosts Aaron and Justin give. The atmosphere that they provide while looking into the cases that they dive into is really easy listening, which made the information of the cases super easy to absorb as they unpack everything in a really digestible format, which was the other noteworthy strength to this podcast. The choices for the cases that they choose to work through are really interesting, and they instantly had me hooked. I'll definitely be listening to more for sure. So, listen to the Generation Y podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or listen 1 week early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. So I live in Atlanta, and right now we're having a moment. About a month ago, a woman walking her dog in Atlanta's Central Park was unfortunately stabbed and mutilated along with her pit bull. The brutality shocked the city to its core and has everyone on edge. And to add to that, another woman was followed home from a gas station after leaving work as a bartender and was kidnapped and then murdered too. This means that we have a whole bunch of really scared women in the city. Anyway, I work very close to the park where the woman and her dog were killed, and I have been extra careful since it happened. Last night, I was working alone, and I had scheduled a new client for a 5 p.m. appointment, thinking that I would be done by 7:15 at the latest. However, she needed some extra work done, so it was after 8:30 by the time that I walked her outside to her car. We stood talking in the parking lot for a couple of minutes before she got into her car. Here I should add too that my parking lot is really small and fairly secluded because of a large hedgerow and retaining wall. After I made sure that she was safely in her car though, I went back into the salon and locked the doors behind me with the intention of cleaning and locking up, and I was inside for like less than 10 seconds before I turned around and saw a man pulling on the door. There had been no one in the parking lot, mind you, that I could see, and there were no other cars than mine and my client. But this guy just appeared from what seemed like nowhere. As I said, I'm already on edge, so I stood there for a second, not sure what to do, and he stood there staring at me with his hands on the door handle. Finally, I walked up to the door. It's a glass door, so I could see him and he could see me, and I said, "What's up?" I could see that he was surprised that I didn't just unlock and open the door, and he stuttered a couple of times before pointing at the hair product wall and saying, Oh, I want to buy some of that makeup over there. Here, I noticed that 1, he's got a pretty good black eye on him, and 2, he's wearing a fairly large surgical mask, outside, alone, which made me think that he was trying to hide his identity. I told him that's not makeup, that's hair products because this is a hair salon and we're closed. Then I turned out all the lights at the front of the salon and walked towards the back wall to hit those lights as well. But once I had all the lights out, I could see him, but he could not see me, so I just sort of watched him because I didn't want to go right out after that. He sort of ended up pacing back and forth by the front door for what must have been a couple of minutes, and then he walked to the upper part of the parking lot, above the retaining wall, and stood sort of half between a tree and a bush. He would stare at the salon door, then crouch down, then walk away all nonchalant, then come back to his hiding spot and stare at the door again. After watching him do this about 3 times, I decided on the next time that he walked away, I was going to make a run for my car. And as soon as he turned his back and started walking towards the direction of the park, I ran out, locked the door, and sprinted the 20 feet to my car in a full-on panic. And thank God for keyless entry. I have no idea what he was up to or if he was really a serial killer or anything. Probably not, right? Probably just trying to rob me. But what I do know is that he definitely saw me in the parking lot talking to my client, and I did not see him. I also know that if I had not locked the door, I would have had a much different night, I think. There's no question in my mind that he was going to do harm to me in some way at least. As a side note too, lots of people have asked if maybe he was homeless, and I absolutely do not think so. And while he definitely scared me, he did not give off the desperate vibe of a lot of the homeless or mentally ill, addicted people that I've encountered in the past. These people don't scare me really. Mostly, I think I just feel sad for them and try to help them in some way. But this guy, he had every alarm in my body screaming at full volume. About 4 years ago, my wife and I planned an evening out for her birthday. My parents babysat, and we went out to a restaurant, and because I drove, I didn't drink, so we didn't bother going anywhere else after we were done in the restaurant. But because the night was still young, we decided to go on a long drive. A location which is relatively nearby is a large national park. We decided to take a drive up there and just sit and chat under the stars. When we arrived up there, the country roads were pretty much dead, and I found a nice open parking area to pull the car up in. We sat inside the car talking. We started making out, and things carried on until we began going a little further, and at no point did either of us leave the car though. As we were doing the deed, headlights lit up our vehicle though, and instantly we were like, oh my goodness, there's someone driving by, I hope they don't see what we're doing. For me, it was an instant turn-off, so I quickly pulled up my trousers and I ceased. I thought the car was just a fellow traveller passing by, but to our surprise, the car pulled into our area and began circling us. I put the keys in the ignition and said, let's go. I drove out of the parking area onto the road and back to the main connecting road, and the car followed. Once on the main connecting road, we could see the make, model, and colour of the car that was following us. It was a dark red Ford. I drove quickly, but not recklessly. The car matched my speed, though, and was right on my tail. At this point, neither of us were 100% sure if we were just being paranoid or if this car was really meaning to follow us, so I said, I know what I'll do. I'll pull off at that random turning point and see what they do. So I put my foot down, and after a few 100 yards down the main road, I made a left-hand turn down a really narrow side lane. I pulled up after a while on this side road, stopped and turned my lights off, and watched in my rearview mirror to see if the red Ford carried straight on the main road or if he turned off. And a few seconds later, there he was. He had turned off and was now coming down this narrow lane towards us again. At first we were blinded by his headlights, but I was sure that it was him. My wife said, though, I don't think it's the same car, you know. And I said, no, it is, look. And as he got closer, it became apparent that it was the same car, so I drove down the road further, and luckily I found a space big enough to turn my car around. I spun around and back to the main road again, and he followed. Now back on the main road for a second time, I did now decide to speed. As I was heading towards the built-up city centre, he kept behind me the whole way, and eventually we stopped at a red light and he was right behind. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw his face. To this day, I can still see that face too. He was a middle-aged man, slightly tubby with glasses and thin grey hair. At this point, I was freaked out. We both were, in fact. I said to my wife, I'm going to keep driving and try and lose him, but I'm not driving home, so he doesn't know where we live, and she agreed. We drove around for maybe another 10 minutes. He was still following, too. At this point, I was beginning to consider the possibility of calling the cops, but thought that I would give it a few more minutes of trying to lose him. Thankfully, a few streets later, he turned off and was never seen again. Now, I know it's a real possibility that he may have been a dogger. Not sure if this is a thing in America, but it's basically where strangers meet other strangers in the wilderness to get it on. But if he were a dogger, or if he thought that we were doggers, we're not, then surely he would have understood that we weren't interested when we actively drove away. The fact that he followed us into the built-up city for like 25 minutes or more makes me think that he had more sinister intentions. To this day, this is still the weirdest moment that I've had in my life. This happened last night in Austin, Texas, about midnight. I was in my bed when I heard like frenetic knocking. I walked out of my bedroom while the knocking continued again and heard a woman saying, "Please help me," along with crying, but it was faint. I quickly looked at the peephole to see no one there, and no other doors were being knocked on. Just mine, which is odd by itself, but I'm also on the 3rd floor. Why would someone walk all the way up just to my apartment if in distress, right? I think it was a recording too, because if someone really needed help, they would be banging on everyone's door, right? I called the police in any case, immediately, and the dispatcher told me not to open the door and if I had a weapon. I have heard of this tactic before, which is why I was so cautious, while slightly different with it being a recording of a baby crying, though. Just insane, though, when thinking about the statistics of stranger abductions usually result in murder. Also, just so sick to try and prey on people's empathy like that. The police drove by, though, and I saw them using their spotlight to look through the complex, but as of now, I have no idea if anyone was found or by chance someone was hurt, if they found her. I've barely slept with all the possibilities of how this person found me, where they saw me, when they followed me, or if they live in this complex. I'm like 4'10", live alone, and really don't know many people in my area. No family close either. Have they been watching me and know all of this? I mean, it's just making me go crazy. Stay vigilant, though. Don't fall for these tactics, and know that not everything you read on the internet is false. I heard about this a year ago, and I wonder if I hadn't have known about it already, would I have actually have opened the door? Where would I be right now, and would I even be alive? This world can be a really messed up place. Also, I've talked with the management to let them know about what's going on. As of right now, nobody else has reported to them anything similar happening. I'm going to contact the police again for an update, obviously. I was redirected to another PD, but they weren't the ones who responded to the call. I know it takes some time for reports to be filed and all that, so I'm trying to be patient. I just want to know if this has happened to anybody else, I guess. I've ordered a Ring camera, though, and we'll be picking it up shortly. At least this way I could get a video of them if they come back, and it'll help me sleep too. As far as it being a prank, I mean, sure, absolutely it could be, but I'd be more inclined to believe it if it happened to other women in the apartment. Maybe it has, but they haven't said anything. One side of the coin, though, is that it's a very cruel prank that I shouldn't worry about. The other, though, is that someone has been watching me and had something sinister in mind. It's horrifying to think that someone would pull an elaborate prank like this, or real-world things that happen that we never think could happen to us, right? As for guns and self-defense classes, I'll be getting both of these, but they both take time and a lot of money. I don't want to, just get a cheap gun with no training. That won't help much. It will be something that I'll invest my time and money into, though, but for the short security, I can really only get a Ring camera and just stay updated with the PD. Anyway, thanks for all your helpful tips like the neighborhood apps and gun safety and all that stuff. I appreciate it a lot during this very scary time, and I'll do my best. This happened years ago, and I haven't really shared it anywhere else, other than with other people around me when the supernatural topic comes up, but apart from that, I sort of keep it to myself. Now, I think I was about 12 at the time, and me and my two cousins, for reference, Garrett was also 12 and my cousin Jessa and her friend were both 14. Being the little stirrers that we were, whenever I would come up to visit, we always liked to sneak out of the house and go and get into all kind of shenanigans around the neighborhood, and tonight we were going to go gnoming. Basically, it's a modified version of a classic Nicky Nicky Nine Doors game, where we would knock on someone's door and see who could stand on the victim's lawn without moving for the longest. It's a pretty heavy wooded area along the coast, lots of wildlife too, so we started our journey around 10 p.m. I don't think any of us could muster the balls to do it because everyone's lights were off, and I guess we had some respect. But I remember the moon being super big that night, a great moon too. Also, I'm going to add here that there were a big series of lights on the water where you could see down the hill, but that could have just been one of the ferries for sure. Anyways, we continued up a hill towards a wooded area that we like to call the Witch's Forest. We had wild imaginations back then. Upon continuing about 200 meters away, 3 tall white figures walked out of the forest, and they almost looked like they had white robes on, but big black eyes in the middle and long bony hands. Immediately, too, we all felt this feeling of dread, and then an eerie silence overcame the entire area. I remember being frozen and all of us just sort of standing there not moving, wide-eyed and confused, when I suddenly jolted and grabbed my cousin Garrett's arm and yelled, "We need to leave now." My cousin, after giving his head a shake, came to his senses, but my cousin Jessa and her friend Diana were not responding, as if in some sort of state of shock or something. So, in the end, we just grabbed them and whipped them back by their arms, where they seemed to have come back from whatever trance that they were in. And we ran back extremely quickly. Upon turning the corner too and making it back to the house, the sound of the night came back too, which was really weird. I don't know what it was or if it was anything that we saw in the end, but it terrified me and my cousins for years. I don't think we slept that night too. I think we just stayed up talking about it all night. The feeling of just being totally out of control overcame us, I suppose, and I don't know how or why I was able to snap out of it, but I did, and I think I'm grateful for that. About a month ago, when summer was just at its end, my friend Rose and I decided to go for a drive up to the mountains. I grew up nearly out of the city limits and drove the mountain roads often. Rose is a newer friend in my life and had only been up the mountains maybe a few times. So I was eager to show her how cool it was at night, especially when you're headed back to town and you can see all of the city lights as you're leaving the foothills. Now, I love listening to creepy videos and watching scary movies, which may have been a big help for Rose and I on this particular night. So we headed up in my van, a dependable 2003 Toyota, who had made the journey with me dozens of times before. There's a part where the pavement ends and the gravel road takes you deeper into the mountain, and just beside this stretch of asphalt to gravel is a stretch of dirt that people use to park their trucks and trailers. Rose and I drove by, and I noted that the pullout was empty, as was normal for this time of night. It was 10 p.m, the sun had set, and the lights with timers had all turned on in town. I'd never seen any lights up in the mountain, though. Almost every farming field on the mountains is fenced off with a locked gate that will say private property, normally too with bullet holes in the middle to show that the owners are armed and generally are pretty ticked off at idiots that try to break into their fields. Every field in the mountains is watered with a center pivot irrigation system too. Those are the sort of long, repeatedly arched systems with metal frames and wheels. They're commonly seen all over the United States agricultural districts. I'd seen a few irrigation systems in town that have lights with timers on them, so at first I wasn't too surprised when I saw one light in a field. We'd only gone maybe a quarter of a mile in by now, but then I remembered that not only had the light not been there before, it was actually in the wrong place. I sighed, which was probably not what Rose wanted to hear in the middle of our first nighttime mountain excursion. Rose asked, "What's up?" "Well, I know farmers are harvesting now, so I guess a light in a field makes sense, but at the same time, I've never seen that one before," I say, gesturing off to our right, where there's a very random amber light off at the edge of the field. It's dark enough that I can't see any of the fences or any of the boulders around it, but I was familiar enough with the mountains to know that it was the edge of the property. I started to tap on the wheel anxiously as I was filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to keep going because the mountains were going to be beautiful in the half moon, and Rose had never seen them at night before, like I said. But at the same time, my brain told me that if I'm going to listen to a few dozen hours of horror stories per month, I'd at least better get some meaning out of them. So I say, "I'm sorry, Rose. I would keep going. Those were tractor headlights, I think, but I've never seen just one headlight right there, especially in that field. I've never even seen it farmed, so it wouldn't make sense to waste energy or money lighting it." Rose is amazing and didn't mind that we were turning around, only a quarter of a mile in. We turn and we head back towards the asphalt. I had no idea why, but I felt like there was a clock that had suddenly started ticking. "Hey Rose, could you please hold the handle? I'm going to go fast enough that you might want to hold on to something. I promise that we're safe though, okay?" Rose silently clutched the handle above the passenger side of the door, and I went faster. I felt the sense that it was time to hurry up, so I did. I zoomed back towards the asphalt as fast as I dared, my sense of trepidation only intensifying when we finally reached the truck parking zone. And there was a white truck and a flatbed trailer that had not been there less than 10 minutes before this. And 5, maybe even 6 guys were around the truck that had its headlights on. But one guy was in a UTV, backing it off the flatbed trailer so fast that I thought that he was going to crash into one of his friends. I raced by and somebody ran behind the car. I quickly turned onto a road that would lead to the main road. "Rose?" I asked, while inclining my way up to 70 miles per hour. "Were those people there when we drove by earlier?" I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy. "I'm pretty sure they weren't," Rose said evenly. I sighed, copying her tone, even as I jumped up to 75 and glanced in my rearview mirror. As far as I could tell, they weren't following us, which was good, but we had 8 miles of straight flat roads with no cover before we actually managed to reach civilization again. "Did they seem like they were in a hurry to you?" There was no other traffic, so we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which helped us both remain as calm as possible. "Just a bit," she said nervously, looking over her shoulder to check if any cars were following us. Thankfully, nobody came, and we drove to a crowded restaurant and sat in the car while we calmed down. We tried to think of a reason why those guys would have shown up so abruptly in the middle of the night like that. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and were in trouble, but all of the land in the mountains are private property, so nobody camps there. All I can say is that I'm glad that Rose and I left, so we didn't have to find out why 6 guys decided that they needed to rush up the mountain in the middle of the night and chase our car like that. So I just moved not too long ago to a house on the other side of the city. I was barely even settled in when all of this happened. One of the first things I took care of was to get my home security up and running. I'm a very cautious person at the best of times because of things that have happened in the past, and I don't feel comfortable without cameras and motion detectors, etc. It was my second day in this house, as in actually living there with everything set up. I was at my desk, working on my newest Unreal Engine project, when I glanced at the monitor for my cameras, which showed a man standing in the street in front of my house. He was by my mailbox, and I watched for a minute as he would reach toward my box, then stop like he was hesitating and look up at my house. I found it odd, and I decided to go and see what was going on. I wasn't too concerned, as I own a pistol and had it with me. But by the time that I got out there, which wasn't very long, mind you, the guy was gone. He'd already crossed the street to the next block and was walking away pretty quickly. I didn't think too much of it. I really figured that he had the wrong house or something simple like that. I checked the mailbox too, just because of him being right there, and it was still empty. I'd very briefly entertained the notion that he'd placed something inside, maybe something grisly or frightening, but that was probably a result of me reading too much Stephen King. Anyway, it didn't take long for me to forget about the incident entirely and bury myself into my computer again. Hours passed, and before I knew it, it was midnight, and I decided it was time to go and relax, and I went down to lay on my couch and watch some TV. I would say, probably about 20 minutes later, I started hearing noises from outside. I pulled up my phone and checked my cameras, but there seemed to be nothing going on outside, and the motion detectors hadn't triggered, so I just went back to my show. I looked up just a while later, and I saw a man looking through my window, staring right at me. I yelled, "What the heck, man?" and jumped off the couch, grabbing my pistol off the table. He wasn't in the window anymore, so I went outside to the side of my house, and I didn't see him. I checked my entire property, and the man was now gone. The camera showed that he'd actually run into my backyard and hopped my fence into the alley, and he was pretty fast about it too. I realized that it was the man from earlier and wondered what the heck was going on. I debated filing a police report, but in the end I decided not to. I haven't had a wonderful experience in the past with law enforcement and tend to avoid it if I can. I did note at the time, though, that none of my motion sensors had triggered when this happened, and figured that they were probably not set up right. I didn't want to check them as it was early in the morning and dark, so I planned to do so later in the day. And I soon found that I had been wrong. I ended up dozing off on the couch, and I was awoken to the motion sensor alarm going off. I'm not a heavy sleeper, and it didn't take me long at all to respond. All in all, it was probably just a few seconds before I got outside, and it was, of course, this man again. He was running down the street in the same direction as the first time, too. But this time, I found something quite bothersome on the footage. The man hadn't even triggered the motion alarms. He'd been at my window looking in for like several minutes already by the time the alarm went off, apparently just watching me sleep. I don't know, but the alarm was triggered on the other side of my house by my neighbor's dog, of all things. And to this day, I still just don't have any answers. A neighbor of mine saw the footage and thought that it was the son of the house's former resident, who was known to be pretty unstable and disturbed. I did file a police report, and of course nothing ever came of it. They didn't even really waste much time or energy looking into it. In the end, I have no idea how he avoided triggering the motion sensors like that, or what he wanted from me. But I will tell you that I do keep my windows closed and curtains drawn from now on, because you never know who's watching. So, I briefly lived in a 300-year-old farmhouse that was actually famous for being a key property in the Underground Railroad in Indiana. There were a lot of creepy things that happened while we were there, but here's some of the things that I can remember. So, my mother collected glass angels, and one night we woke up to her freaking out because every single angel in the house, probably close to like 100, were turned 180 degrees around and faced away from the center of the room. She would normally only have them face to the center of the room, so this was really weird. On another occasion, my sister and I both saw the same extremely tall, thin man in a baggy coat walking around in the hallways at night. We didn't even know that we both saw him until almost a decade later when we were just talking about stuff that happened there and we both mentioned it. My aunt actually came over once and was stirring her coffee with a spoon when the spoon stopped on its own and started stirring in the opposite direction. My dad too had set his coffee down on the table one day, and when he walked back into the room, the coffee was, as he described it, aggressively stirring itself, like the metal spoon was upright in the air and everything. This one still bothers me to this day too, because it's extremely weird. The house would never go cold, but it would get extremely hot all of a sudden before returning to normal temperatures, specifically upstairs in my sister's room. There was also a hidden room behind a bookshelf and under a fake floor where slaves crossing into Indiana would hide. This is the only writing on the house I remember reading, and I specifically remembered seeing claw marks on the walls of that room. To be fair, it was an old house, and who knows what kind of critters have been down there, so it's a bit of an iffy one, for sure. But things would get knocked off shelves and furniture would move almost constantly. We had a center coffee table with pull-out stools, and the stools would be found all over the place all the time, even on top of the table sometimes. The top floor of the house burnt down in the 70s, and no one was injured or died in the fire, but they did have to rebuild the upstairs, and on the stairway up to the second floor there was a distinct portion of the wall where the house was obviously rebuilt. It went from like brick to drywall right at that spot. Oh, and I almost forgot, but this was a really big one too. When we were looking at the house before moving in, before we even walked in, my sister said, "Did someone die here?" And it turns out that somebody did die after falling off the ladder and cracking their head on the little walkway up to the front door. I remember my mum thinking too that it was super weird when she found out what had happened. And really, that's pretty much it. I don't distinctly remember hearing voices, seeing shadow creatures, or anything outside of these exact events. I've just been thinking about it a lot recently, and I figured that I would share it with you guys. And I'm down to hear your theories if you guys would like to share, but either way, thanks for listening.